December 8, 1941. Tokyo glowed with celebration. Inside the Imperial Navy headquarters, laughter echoed off marble walls as officers toasted what they believed to be a perfect victory. Outside, the city pulsed with pride, banners waving, drums beating, a nation convinced it had struck a mortal blow against America. But in one corner of the war room, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sat still. His face was calm, his hands folded, yet behind that silence lived a fear he dared not share. He had lived in the United States. He had walked through Detroit's endless assembly lines, had seen oil fields in Texas stretching beyond sight. He knew what his nation had just awakened, a sleeping giant made of steel, oil, and resolve. The celebration was thunder, his silence prophecy. Months before, Yamamoto had warned Prime Minister Fumimaro Konoe that Japan could fight bravely for 6 months. But beyond that, he had no confidence. Those words now rang like an echo in the smoke over Pearl Harbor. What Japan's leaders saw as triumph, Yamamoto understood as beginning, the beginning of an industrial war unlike any in human history. This was not a contest of courage, but of creation. The arsenal of democracy had been challenged, and it would answer in the only language it knew, production without limit. In the coming years, the world would witness something no empire had imagined, factories that moved faster than fleets, workers who fought with wrenches and torches, and a nation that turned its labor into victory. The Pacific War would become a test not only of nations, but of ideas, whether belief could defeat reality, whether pride could outlast production. This is the hidden front of World War II, the war not fought with guns, but with machines, men, and the unbreakable rhythm of a people who refused to surrender. Stay with us as we uncover the truth Admiral Yamamoto already knew, that the fate of empires is decided not by the roar of battle, but by the hum of a factory at midnight. The war that Japan had unleashed on December 7, 1941, was not born in a single night. It was the culmination of a decade of ambition, a nation reaching beyond its grasp, chasing an empire built on borrowed resources and blind faith. Throughout the 1930s, Japan's leaders convinced themselves that their island nation could no longer survive without expansion. Manchuria fell first, then China burned, and by the time French Indochina was occupied, the dream of a self-sufficient empire had hardened into policy. But hidden beneath that dream lay an impossible equation, an empire of limited steel, oil, and labor, challenging a continent that measured its resources in oceans. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto knew those numbers. He had seen America's vastness not on maps, but with his own eyes. Railroads running endlessly, oil rigs swaying like forests, factories pulsing with human rhythm. To him, war with the United States was not a contest of strength, but of time. 6 months, he had said, I can fight for 6 months. After that, he feared Japan's strength would begin to fade, not from lack of courage, but from exhaustion. Inside Japan's Imperial General Headquarters, few shared his caution. The victories in China had filled the military elite with faith in their own destiny. They believed that boldness could replace production, that sacrifice could outweigh industry. To them, Japan's fighting spirit was a weapon stronger than steel, but to Yamamoto it was a dream too heavy to carry. When Pearl Harbor's smoke cleared, the admirals toasted themselves as heroes. They saw battleships burning and imagined America broken. They believed a single strike had shattered an empire. Yet what they had truly struck was a match against a storm. For across the Pacific, America was waking, not in anger alone, but in unity. Factories that had once built cars and farm tools began to build engines of war. Ford's assembly lines turned from sedans to bombers. General Motors, Chrysler, Boeing, names once known for peace, became the arsenal of democracy. Men left fields, women left homes, and the heartbeat of industry became the rhythm of defiance. Meanwhile, in Tokyo, strategy turned into self-deception. Japan's planners convinced themselves that America would never fight a long war. They spoke of the perimeter strategy: seize territory quickly, fortify it, and wait for the Americans to tire. They imagined the United States as impatient, soft, unaccustomed to hardship. They never understood that America's greatest weapon was not speed, it was endurance. By early 1942, Japanese forces swept across the Pacific like a rising tide. The Philippines, Hong Kong, Malaya, the Dutch East Indies. In 6 months, their flag flew over a vast empire stretching thousands of miles. Tokyo's newspapers spoke of destiny fulfilled, of divine victory. But Yamamoto knew better. He could read the mathematics of defeat written behind every victory headline. Every mile conquered was another mile to defend, another ship to supply, another strain on an industrial machine already running on fumes. As steel grew scarce and oil reserves dwindled, the Japanese high command clung tighter to illusion. They believed courage could fill the fuel tanks, that devotion could forge steel. But wars, like factories, obey physics, not faith. By mid-1942, whispers of unease spread quietly through the officer corps. Reports from intelligence units showed American shipyards working day and night. The number of carriers, aircraft, and tanks under construction defied belief. Yet Tokyo dismissed it all as exaggeration, propaganda meant to weaken morale. To question the dream was to invite suspicion. Even Yamamoto, the empire's greatest admiral, walked carefully, his doubts carried in silence. In quiet moments aboard his flagship, he studied maps of the Pacific. Blue voids scattered with red pins marking Japan's victories. To others, it was triumph. To him, it was a noose tightening slowly around the homeland. Every island gained was another supply line stretched thin, another promise that Japan could not keep. The arithmetic of empire had begun to turn against them. And across the ocean, a nation once reluctant to fight now stood united. From Detroit to Dallas, from the shipyards of California to the steel mills of Pittsburgh, America was transforming. The sound of hammers replaced speeches. The language of production became the creed of freedom. While Japan celebrated soldiers, America celebrated workers. Both fought for survival, one through faith, the other through function. The tragedy of the Pacific War is not that Japan fought bravely, but that it fought blindly. The nation's strength of spirit, unmatched in courage, was chained to a strategy built on denial. And as the war expanded, the truth grew impossible to ignore. The battlefields of Asia were only the surface. Beneath them, an invisible war was being waged, a war of steel, labor, and invention, the true heart of World War II. Soon, even victory would begin to feel like defeat. For when faith collides with machinery, when pride meets production, the outcome is written long before the first shot is fired. The illusion of invincibility never lasts forever. For Japan, it began to crack in the spring of 1942 when a handful of American bombers dared to do the unthinkable, strike the homeland itself. On April 18th, 16 B-25 Mitchell bombers launched from the deck of the carrier Hornet, thousands of miles from safety. The Doolittle raid, as history would name it, caused little physical damage, but its psychological explosion echoed through every hall of power in Tokyo. The unshakable belief in Japan's security had shattered. If American planes could reach Tokyo so early, what else could reach them later? To the men around Emperor Hirohito, the answer was unthinkable. They refused to see the raid as warning. Instead, they chose to chase it away with new ambition, expand further east, stretch the defensive perimeter, and strike one final blow that would end the war on their terms. That decision led them to a small atoll halfway between Asia and America, Midway. Admiral Yamamoto designed the plan himself, hoping to lure America's remaining carriers into an ambush. On paper, it was flawless. In reality, it rested on one fatal assumption, that the Americans were still reeling, still unprepared, still blind. But the United States had changed since December. Factories were roaring, shipyards were alive with sparks and sweat, and behind locked doors at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, a group of cryptanalysts had done what battleships could not. They had broken the Japanese naval code. By early June, the trap had reversed. The Americans knew the Japanese were coming. They knew the target was Midway, and they were waiting. June 4th, 1942. The morning sky over the Pacific was bright, calm, deceitful. From 4 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, waves of aircraft thundered toward Midway Island. Bombs fell, fires raged, and the air filled with smoke. But the American runways survived, and somewhere beyond the horizon, 3 American carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, prepared to strike back. When the first American torpedo bombers arrived, they were slaughtered. 41 planes went down, almost every crew lost. The sea became a graveyard of courage, yet their sacrifice bought the most precious currency in war: time. By drawing Japanese fighters low, they opened the sky above for the next wave. At 10:22 that morning, it happened. Dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown pierced the clouds and fell upon the Japanese fleet like steel rain. In 5 minutes, 3 of Japan's proudest carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were engulfed in fire. A 4th Hiryu would follow by sunset. The Pacific, once ruled by the rising sun, now burned under it. When the flames died, more than 3,000 Japanese sailors were gone, along with hundreds of irreplaceable pilots and mechanics. For Japan, the loss was not just material, it was generational. No amount of training could rebuild those men quickly enough, and no industry could replace those ships at American speed. In Tokyo, the shock was slow to surface. Official reports softened the truth, speaking of temporary setbacks. But Admiral Yamamoto, reading the raw dispatches aboard his flagship, felt the full weight of what had happened. He did not weep. He did not speak. He simply bowed his head and whispered, "So it begins." The war had turned, not in a single moment, but in direction. The hunter had become the hunted, and Japan's empire had reached its widest point. From then on, every victory would only buy time. Across the ocean, America was beginning to understand its own power. The attack that was meant to break its spirit had instead united its people in purpose. Men who once built cars were now building bombers. Women who had never set foot in a factory were riveting the wings of B-24s in Willow Run. Farmers, teachers, and mechanics all worked to feed a machine that no enemy could match. The same industrial heartbeat that once produced comfort was now producing survival. Each hour, somewhere in the United States, a new aircraft rolled out. Each day, another ship slid into the water. Each week, another regiment left for the Pacific. Meanwhile, Japan's empire began to feel hunger for fuel, for steel, for time. The vast territories that once promised resources now demanded protection. Supply lines stretched thin. Ships carrying oil from the Dutch East Indies were hunted down by American submarines that moved like ghosts beneath the waves. For every tanker sunk, the empire lost more. Then oil, it lost momentum. By 1943, the imbalance was undeniable. American production was not just faster, it was evolving. Fighters improved, carriers grew larger, bombers flew farther. Each innovation compounded the last. War was no longer about heroism, it was about adaptation, and Japan could no longer adapt fast enough. In the skies above the Pacific, the tone of combat had changed. Where once Japanese pilots dominated with skill and agility, they now faced swarms of planes they could not outnumber or outlast. The Zero, once a symbol of unmatched grace, became a target for the heavier, faster Hellcats and Corsairs that filled the American decks. Even the most devoted Japanese pilots began to notice the difference. Their replacements arrived younger, with fewer flight hours, less experience, and less fuel for training. While American pilots trained for months, the new Japanese flyers were rushed into combat, their courage outpacing their readiness. It was bravery without balance, sacrifice without strategy. The industrial war was no longer invisible. It was visible in every sky, every harbor, every mile of ocean claimed by steel. It was the slow, relentless tide that no empire could turn back. And yet, in Tokyo, the belief in destiny persisted. They still spoke of the spirit of Yamato, of the unbreakable heart of the samurai. But spirit cannot stop hunger, nor can faith fuel a fleet. This was the true shift of World War II, the moment when myth met machinery. The Pacific would never be the same again. The factories of America had become its battlefields, and each gear, each rivet, each spark was a weapon forged in silence. The war's climax was approaching, and though Yamamoto would not live to see its end, his prophecy would outlive him. Japan had awakened the giant. Now the giant was fully awake and moving. By the end of 1943, the dream of empire was fading into smoke. The same sun that had risen over 1,000 victories now set behind a horizon of ashes. Japan's leaders could no longer deny what Yamamoto had known all along. The empire had built a war it could not afford to fight. The numbers told the story. American shipyards were launching vessels faster than Japan could sink them. Carriers rolled from dry docks like clockwork, each one larger, stronger, hungrier for the sky. Factories in Detroit and Seattle worked 3 shifts without rest, turning raw steel into wings, engines, and armor. For every Japanese plane shot down, 10 new American aircraft took flight. For every ship lost, 3 more replaced it. It was not strategy, it was inevitability. Japan's generals clung to illusions. They believed that courage could compensate for shortages, that sacrifice could defy arithmetic. But factories, not fantasies, decide the length of a war, and Japan's factories were dying. Oil reserves dwindled, aluminum vanished, trains stopped running. In the homeland, families melted, their pots and pans for metal that would never reach the front. The merchant fleet, once the empire's lifeline, became its tomb. American submarines prowled the Pacific, sinking tankers and transports faster than Japan could build replacements. In 1943 alone, Japan lost more shipping tonnage than its shipyards produced. By 1944, the islands were starving, not only for food, but for hope. Then came the summer of despair, the Marianas, Saipan, Tinian, Guam. Names that once meant little now became symbols of irreversible defeat. When Saipan fell in July 1944, American bombers could reach Tokyo. For the first time, Japanese citizens saw the war arrive at their doorstep. The night skies glowed red with fire, and the empire's leaders could no longer hide behind speeches. In Tokyo, silence replaced confidence. Prime Minister Hideki Tojo, the man who had led Japan into war, was forced to resign. His successor inherited a nation drowning in denial, factories destroyed, fields burning, railroads broken, yet surrender remained unspeakable. They still called it fighting for the emperor, but in truth, they were fighting against reality. In the seas around the Philippines, that reality arrived like thunder. The Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 1944, became the largest naval battle in history. It was supposed to be Japan's last chance to change fate. Instead, it was the final proof that fate had already been decided. In just 4 days, the Imperial Navy ceased to exist as a fighting force. 4 carriers, 3 battleships, 10 cruisers, 11 destroyers, gone. The sea that had once carried Japan's empire now carried its ghosts. From that point forward, the war was no longer about victory. It was about survival and pride. The American advance closed in on every front. Cities became ashes. Children carried buckets of water to fight fires they could never control. B-29 bombers darkened the sky, their engines a song of inevitability. The bombing of Tokyo in March 1945 killed 100,000 people in a single night. The flames consumed 16 square miles and left 1 million homeless. The air itself became a weapon. Even that was not the end. The empire fought on through madness. Kamikaze pilots turning themselves into human bombs, soldiers dying on islands long after defeat was certain. The samurai code had become a national suicide note. The emperor, once distant and divine, now heard the death cry of his own nation echo through the palace walls. In August, the final blows fell. On the 6th, Hiroshima disappeared beneath a single flash. On the 9th, Nagasaki followed. And on the same day, the Soviet Union invaded Manchuria, tearing apart Japan's last illusion of negotiation. Surrounded, burned, and broken, Japan had no path left but surrender. On August 15, 1945, the emperor's voice reached his people for the first time in history. His words were careful, indirect. The war situation has developed not necessarily to Japan's advantage. But behind those words was the truth every citizen already knew: the war was over. The dream of conquest had turned to dust. The sleeping giant had not only awakened, it had remade the world. In the ruins, the lessons waited to be understood. Interrogations of captured officers revealed the same confession again and again. They had known. They had seen the reports, the numbers, the intelligence. They simply refused to believe that spirit could lose to steel. Admiral Tojo, once the face of defiance, admitted under oath, "We did not understand American potential. Others called it fate, some called it punishment. But Yamamoto would have called it mathematics." The empire that began the war chasing resources had ended it starving. The soldiers who worshiped discipline found themselves defeated by organization, and the industrial machine they mocked became the model they later emulated. 2 decades later, Japan's peacetime factories would rise from the ashes, building cars, ships, and electronics for a world that once feared them. The nation that sought dominance through conquest found greatness through creation. That is the irony written into every line of history. The same force that destroyed Japan's armies saved its future. The same American production that bombed its cities later rebuilt them through trade and reconstruction. And from those ruins grew a lesson larger than the war itself. Strength without wisdom is just noise, and victory without compassion is hollow. The Pacific lay quiet again, but beneath the silence, the story of how industry triumphed over ideology still hums. The echo of machines that once built freedom out of fire. The final act of this war was not fought with swords or planes. It was fought with realization that courage without reason leads only to ruin. The numbers had always told the truth. It simply took a world to believe them. When the guns fell silent and the smoke lifted from the Pacific, the world faced its reflection in the ashes. Cities were gone, families shattered, generations marked forever. Yet from that devastation rose a truth as clear as the morning after a storm. Wars are not won by weapons alone. They are won by people, by endurance, by the quiet power of unity that outlasts fear. In the end, World War II was not merely a conflict of nations. It was a struggle between 2 ideas: domination through might or survival through cooperation. The same factories that forged the wings of bombers also built the bridges of peace that would follow. The same hands that tightened bolts in the darkness of Detroit later helped rebuild cities across oceans Every machine, every ship, every rivet carried more than metal. It carried belief. For America, the war revealed the strength of its ordinary citizens. The worker at the assembly line, the farmer in the field, the mother who rationed and waited, each became a soldier in their own quiet way. Their effort transformed industrial labor into moral victory. It proved that freedom defended by all is stronger than tyranny enforced by few. For Japan, defeat was not the end, but the beginning of understanding. The lesson that Yamamoto saw too late became the foundation of a new nation, a country that would one day lead through innovation, not invasion. The children born in rubble grew up to design a future where trade replaced conquest and wisdom replaced pride. And for the world, the legacy of World War II endures as a reminder carved into stone and memory alike. It whispers through museums, through veteran stories, through the silence of memorials where names are endless. It tells us that peace is not inherited. It is earned again and again through vigilance, compassion, and truth. If the last century taught humanity anything, it is that every empire, every ideology, every weapon fades, but the need for understanding never does. The cost of arrogance is written in the ruins of Hiroshima, in the shadows of Berlin, in the numbers that Yamamoto once feared. And the reward for humility is written in the peace that followed, fragile yet precious. World War II ended 80 years ago, but the fight for peace never truly stops. Each generation faces its own giants, ignorance, hatred, division, and must choose whether to awaken them or silence them. If millions once gave their lives for peace, what will you do to protect it today? So before you leave this story, take a breath. Look at the world around you, the factories, the freedom, the fragile calm built from fire. If this story moved you, share it. Speak it aloud. Because remembrance is resistance, and silence is surrender. Type in the comments, "Fight for peace," and let the voices of those who believed in a better world echo once more.